It's easy to focus and say no to things that are obvious, but it's hard to be focused and say things that you genuinely believe might be great ideas.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Ask Valor Masterminds podcast, brought to you by A Advanced Services and Fuse Networks. My name's Galen.
I'm Joe.
We're coming at you from the Creative Block Studios in Seattle, Washington. So Joe, for our new listeners and viewers tuning in for the first time, how do we start everything here?
Sure. So it first started out as a private Facebook group page. The purpose was to bring different businesses together into a community to kind of talk to each other, share tips, ask questions, kind of guide and coach one another. Mm-hmm. From that, we were introduced to podcasting and said, you guys would make a good podcast. Mm-hmm. So the purpose of our podcast really is just to bring on different guest speakers that are experts in their industry to kind of share their thoughts and educate our audience, you, on different aspects of being a business owner and entrepreneur.
Awesome. Thank you. And today we have the pleasure of Mr. Nathan Young joining us all the way from our neighbor in the North, Canada. Joe, what's our topic for today?
Find your audience by going back to the basics.
All right. So before we go into that, Nathan, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
So my name is Nathan Young. I'm the founder of Find Your Audience. We're predominantly a B2B SaaS marketing agency. We've been in business for about 7 years. But I'm actually not traditionally a marketer. So I think that's always been the thing that I think attracts a lot of people to our firm. My background was actually in finance and in management consulting and operations. So I was trained I went to school for marketing, but my actual professional career was mainly not marketing until I essentially started this firm. And this actually came out from leaving an ad technology company. So it's been a long journey.
So what made you decide to go on your own then?
To be honest, I've always ran random businesses ever since I was younger. So I think that was just my thing. But I think like every entrepreneur, there's like these little tiny blips in your career path where you're just like, I hate how I don't have a paycheck and I really want to have a paycheck. And you go, maybe I'll go do this and maybe I'll be happy. And then you do it and then you're not happy. So you go right back to being an entrepreneur.
Awesome.
All right. So that leads us to our good transition, our first question. So what are some early lessons learned as an entrepreneur with those blips along the way? What was one of the things that you learned early in your entrepreneurial life?
I would say probably, I wouldn't even say I learned this like early. I think I'm still learning. And I hate it just because it's like, it's advice you'll hear everywhere. And it's just like focus. And I know that sounds so silly, but it's this idea where focus is really where you have the willpower to say no to things that may sound even amazing to you, may even be an opportunity to you. And that's real focus, right? It's easy to focus and say no to things that are obvious, but it's hard to be focused and say things that you genuinely believe might be great ideas. And I think that has been the biggest lesson I've learned, not only in where I spend my time, but more importantly, just how focused the business is. And also just like how focused we execute on certain things.
Okay. So being a business owner, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of advice. What's been the best piece of advice that you've been given?
It would be that I've ignored it for years. So I'll give an example. My agency, Find Your Audience, we're about 25, 27 employees at the moment. I lose count. We do everything. We do trade shows, we do websites, we do development, we do creative, we do content writing, we do SEO, we do backlinking, we do everything. And when I tell people, they're like, wow, you did a really good job. And I was like, yeah, but I literally climbed the steepest mountain possible to build this business when I could have just made it easier for myself. So the thing is like, I decided to not specialize in anything and to give everyone everything. And that made it incredibly difficult to operationalize and productize so many of the different products that we have to produce. And it's funny, we're kind of now doing the opposite. Usually you specialize, you scale, then you go into adjacent revenue streams. I'm kind of doing the opposite where I've already done all of them. Now I'm specializing downwards. So I'm specializing right products.
Right. Awesome.
So since this is technically a marketing podcast, why is marketing important in your words?
Oh God, it's the easiest thing possible. It's just if no one knows what you're doing, no one's going to ever buy your service. And I think the biggest thing is that, and it's been proven through so many different studies, people have made decisions long before they make that decision. And a lot of that is subconscious. And so if you're not out there getting people who are uninterested, knowing who you are, you're going to lose that opportunity to be the first thing that they look for. And when you lose that opportunity to be the first thing they look for, what some people call mental convenience or mental recall, you are just really at a poor position. You're going against the grain, and that's marketing, right? So for whether this is for B2B companies doing massive enterprise sales, which happen every 4 years, or you're just a consumer product. If you're buying a water cup, you're buying a Stanley cup right now. Why? Because it's literally everywhere.
Right.
But right, and so if you're losing that mental convenience, you could be the best water cup with quote unquote no lead, but no one's going to know you, right? Because everyone knows Stanley Cup, and the likelihood of them going to the store to buy your best of breed cup, it's just not happening because Stanley Cup is there. And so I think that's why you gotta be in the consumer's mind at all times in order for you to have the best chance of winning when they make that decision.
Awesome insight. So now we come to the part of our podcast, our advanced service pump you up quote of the day. Joe, you mind reading that for us?
There is no right or wrong way, just a better way. Why is that quote resonate with you?
It's because I think my entire life I have tried to believe that there's only right ways. And the reality is, I think that's just detrimental to the psyche of an entrepreneur, right? If you think that there's always a right way, then you always think you might have done something wrong. And if you continue to think like that, you're just going to have absolutely zero motivation to continue trying to push for the business because you feel like you're making mistakes. But the reality is you're not making mistakes. You're making the best decision you can based on the available information, and you're moving forward. So there's always a way. There's always going to be a better way, but this idea of that there's a binary right or wrong is it's a foolish way of thinking. And I think about that in everything, in the products we market, in the campaigns we choose to do, in the way I built this business. Yes, I just admitted that I built this business terribly, but we're fine. There could have been a better way. And honestly, we're still building better every single day. So that's all that matters.
Right. Nice words said by a true entrepreneur, especially your unique perspective of like the finance operations side has definitely helped you along the way. Now's our Fuse Networks Did You Know segment.
Millions of cyber criminals are out there on a daily basis trying to steal your information. It's not a matter of if, it's when. Small businesses account for 58% of cyber attacks annually. So help your company fight cybercrime and mitigate risk by being proactive. Call Fuse Networks, your local Seattle IT experts at 206-701-6040 for a complimentary IT network and security assessment.
So I'm going to read a couple of these and then wanting to get your thoughts. This first stat, 68% of all online experiences start with a search. So why is that important for our audience to know?
It's so important because if I think LinkedIn did some studies, and they're saying, hey, if only 2% of your market is in the market every single year, then the reality is it's like every 20 years, you're going to get X amount of people seeing it. And then if 68% of that is through search and you're not on search, like how many are you missing? It's huge. It's just like it's a massive number. And I think a lot of people really, really undervalue putting money into their website. I think a lot of people still have this idea that their website is an online brochure, and it is. If you really want to simplify, it's a grossly expensive and tedious online brochure, but it is generally with a high probability, 50% or more, the first impression, right. And it's just something that I think is so important for every business to really focus on, is that internet exposure you have, that search engine exposure you have, is so incredibly important. It might not yield dividends on day one, but it's going to yield dividends through time.
So do you still cringe at business owners and I want to get your reaction on this because we'll come across business owners that'll say, I have a website. My Facebook page is my website. When you hear that,
already see my
what
facial
is your
expression.
reaction? Because I want it for the record for those businesses out there listening to this that'll say, I have a website. It's my Facebook page. Duh. What do you say to those people?
I'm actually gonna give it a great perspective. I'm gonna call this out. So Wealth One Bank in Canada, if you ever want to contact me, I'm happy to redo your website. Wealth One, you're a bank in Canada and you look like you're a website made in 1995. I don't care who you are, but if you come and immigrate to Canada, you ain't opening a bank at Wealth One because it does not instill confidence. So if you were a business and the general population expects you to have a website, just because you have a Facebook page does not instill confidence. And
Thank you.
And my other analogy is I call it the wet paper bag analogy. I was like, the whole reason people believe Hermes bags are worth what they're worth is because of everything you experience around that bag. But if someone gave you a $10,000 bag, vacuum packed, just make sure it doesn't get wet, in a wet paper bag, there is no way you're going to have the confidence that that thing's worth $10,000. So it just shows how much the experience matters to conveying value and confidence.
Awesome. Joe, this next one, please.
Myth. More marketing qualified leads or MQLs means more revenue.
I love this because I feel like every CEO is a marketer, and every podcast and every blog post talks about MQLs and demand generation, and everyone thinks it's the savior to their business. But the reality is that it's not about the MQLs. It's always going to be about your conversion rate. And that's the conversion rate from your MQL to SQLs. So if you have 5 MQLs a year that have a 100% hit rate to SQLs, it's actually amazing. And I'll tell you why. Because not only are you hyper-targeted and you're doing an amazing job finding qualified candidates, guess what? Your sales team is not spending 50% of their time wasting their time on crappy MQLs. So it's not just about generating MQLs. It's always generating quality MQLs. And there's this notion that if you just do more, you will make more revenue. Actually, no. What you will end up doing is pissing off your junior business development people who just joined the company and they're not making any sales. Because marketing has been mandated by someone, an executive, to generate some number of MQLs. And it's arbitrary. And there's no KPI that ties that into conversion. So therefore, they're incentivized to build that. And this is a common theme I see in a lot of companies where they're purely MQL driven. And I don't think they understand on an operational level how much that impacts your sales team.
Right. It's kind of like a Dow for dollars mentality, right? Like you make 150 phone calls a day and then something will happen. You'll stumble on 1 or 2 qualified leads, but then it burns out your sales staff and everything. So let's get into this. Find your audience by going back to the basics. So
I love this topic because I think that a lot of companies need to go back to the basics. So when we brought this topic up, what did you have in mind to explain to our audience what that exactly means?
I love this topic because it's actually so simple, and you think every entrepreneur, every CEO would know this, is do what's already working. It's so simple. I don't know how many times I've gone to companies and they're like, yeah, we're doing conferences. It's okay. How many conferences are you going to? We're going to 2. How many more conferences do you think there are? Like 2 more. And I was like, okay, how much time does it take for your marketing team? It takes up almost all of our time. I was like, okay, what else do you want to do? He's like, well, I really want to do like demand generation. I've been hearing a lot about that. I want to do inbound. I want to do ad funnels. I want to do all these things. And I go, why aren't you just doing more conferences? It's like you have 2 more. So you're the inventory left of that channel is the 2 more you have identified that fit your ideal customer profile. So rather than just trying to maximize that, which by the way, your marketing team is already pristinely built to execute because it's all they're doing, you want to change the direction of that team, make them do a bunch of things that they have actually no experience or track record in your organization to do. And you want to do it because of what? Just honestly, shiny object syndrome, or maybe some CEO or executive forum talking about distributing your channels. Like, there is no good reason. So back to basics is simple. Focus on revenue, focus what's already working. And I can almost guarantee a majority of companies, especially sub like $10 million in ARR, annual revenue, you are not fully maximized likely in the channels that you are in. Like, I can almost guarantee it. You typically only really start seeing that when you like blow past 15, 20 million in ARR. Like then you're getting to the point where you're like, you got to think about some other things, right? Think about community. You want to think about events. You want to think about demand generation. You want to think about content. You can want to think about doing a podcast. Like, now you really need to go into all these different channels to grab bits and pieces of your total TAM. But the likelihood of you maximizing AdWords, like, I'll give a great example. I know almost very few companies who have totally maxed out Google ad display.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, the difficulty, the sheer size of inventory and the likelihood of anyone developing a full funnel that's blacklisting enough of the garbage inside of Google ad display where they actually have a profitable funnel, I'm going to say 1 in 100,000 companies. Because the amount of money you can spend on Google ad display is massive. And
Limitless almost. Right.
yeah, and you can blow your entire budget in a day if you wanted to. And so this idea that we have to do more is just so unfounded. The likelihood that you're maximizing SEO, unlikely. The likelihood of you maximizing Google Ads, unlikely. Maximizing any other channel, unlikely. So just focus on what you already know is working, rather than constantly distributing what limited resources, like human technical resources you have to execute on these strategies, on strategies they have not executed before. And companies just fall flat all the time.
Oh,
Well, I mean, the bright, shiny objects thing, you know, there's so many business owners out there that are seduced by the dark side of the bright and shiny thing, whether, like you said, it's a blog post, it's a mastermind group. They see someone else doing it, so they think, oh, I'm like them, so I need to try it. That the seduction is strong. It's like you're a Jedi getting seduced by the dark side of the Force. It's like the pull is there so much that I need to try it a little bit. It's sexy. It makes me feel empowered. So, I mean, go back to basics. What do you say to that CEO, that owner? Just wake up, get back to what you're doing. What's wrong with, focusing on what works? But the seduction is there for the new thing. Now it's like ChatGPT's trying to occupy all the oxygen. What am I supposed to do to do this, to implement my strategy without focusing on what works? What do you say to those business owners?
So I think this is why I'm lucky, because I have not worn traditionally a marketing hat my entire life, right? I've been very lucky to work with some very large companies in executive capacities. So I can just say things that are really mean, but are really obvious.
Yeah.
And I go, what business are we in, right? And I don't know what business we're talking about. Well, let's just call it age-old saying, widgets, right?
Right.
So it's like let's call so-and-so CEO John. John's really fixated on the fact that we really need to do masterminds. And I go, John, what are we selling right now? We sell widgets. I'm like, perfect. Okay. So how have we sold the widget? We've sold the widgets through this thing. Okay. So is it fair to say that our marketing team is specialized in selling widgets on this specific channel? And they'll go, yes. So I'll go, John, why are we selling silver spoons? And they'll go, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, why do you expect your team to adjust a completely different strategy where they have no operational foundation, and you think you're going to get more revenue quicker, faster, than just pouring more money into already what you know works? So are you going to sell widgets and widgets in the adjacent market, or are you going to sell silver spoons? You can sell silver spoons, but you know the probability of it failing. So the probability of a mastermind failing, probably pretty high on the first chance. So you have a choice. You can waste the next 6 months executing on silver spoons, or you can focus on your widgets, which you're already doing. And you probably know the answer for your marketing team.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question then. I'm a startup company. I'm going to do a scenario. I'm a startup company. I just started my roofing company. What would you advise to a brand new roofing company on the basics of marketing that they should implement into their business?
Oh, that's a a pointed question.
Right.
So I'm happy you asked, because we do work with local businesses. And so what I would say, every business has different, what I call starting foundations. So any local business that I talk to generally don't afford us, because we work with larger enterprise companies. But I
Right.
always tell them it's pretty simple. Google My Business is your bread and butter. If you do not focus on Google My Business, you are missing a large part of the market. And generally speaking, Google My Business rankings are based on how many reviews you have. So the faster you get reviews, the better you're going to be ranking for that. The longer it takes for you to get the reviews, the longer your competitors are going to be beating you. And that's a major ranking factor on Google My Business. So for anyone listening, Google search and Google My Business and ranking on maps are two separate algorithms. So they have different needs.
Thank you. Yes.
And so basically, I would just say, look, you're a local business, so you need to focus on local things. And so rather than you need a website, because again, we have to establish a level of confidence. You're a roofing company. You don't want to look like you're a bunch of people living out of a truck. Like, you got to make it look like you can put on a roof and not have it leak. So do what you need to do to instill confidence, but really focus on how you're going to make that image strong and how you're going to use all the assets you currently have, because you're likely not a huge SaaS company, so you have limited budget. How are you going to make your trucks, your vans, everything that you have already convey the message of confidence? So, a lot of companies, especially local companies, would be like, well, I have a truck. I don't want to spend a bunch of money on vinyl. I was like, well, you can spend a bunch of money on vinyls, or you can spend a bunch of money on digital ads. But I can guarantee you this: if someone needs a roofing product and comes and sees your truck and it's like rusty and it doesn't look good and it doesn't have your website, there's no confidence. So you're not going to get the sale. So spend the money on the things that you already have, and try your best not to focus on all the shiny objects. Focus on the things that are local. And I think really, really pay attention to those things. That's what I would recommend to a local business.
So once they grow their revenue, at what point do you recommend things like billboard advertising, radio advertising, TV advertising?
That's an operational question. So I would simply ask, it's like, look, are you at the point right now where you're actually getting so many inbounds based on your current strategies, where you are actually you actually need a team to actually like triage the sales? And if you're getting to the point where the principal is now no longer actually able to deal with the triaging, you're getting to the point where you're essentially needing to generate more demand in order to meet the scale that you require. So that's a tough thing for me to say for every company, because I can kind of say what you can do for SaaS just on rough revenue numbers, but for roofing companies, it depends on how many people they have. It depends if they're on temp workers or if they're on contract workers or full-time contractors. It depends on how much inventory they have or their scope of reach. But what I will say is, usually when you can start hiring more people is probably when you start ramping up. So you want to scale with your revenue. And if you get to the point where you've maximized all your current assets, meaning the assets that you have to run your actual business, so you don't have to spend all this extra money, then you can start looking at outdoor advertisements. And a tip for this that I really recommend, and real estate agents, I'm talking to you, use call tracking software, please. Like, your ego is so thick, no one cares. You're not Pizza Hut. No one's calling your number because they've memorized it and they need it. They call it like in an immediate need. Every single person in this world seems to think that their phone number is so important, but it isn't. It's only important when someone needs it. So use call tracking to make sure you actually know what out of home is working for you. And what this means is every single out of home thing you have has a different number. And so then you actually know where people are calling you from. It's like so important, but a lot of companies are very ego about this and they just don't do it.
Shout out to What Converts. The CEO was on our podcast, and that's your call tracking, form fill tracking, website bot tracking,
Everything tracking.
everything tracking.
Every channel.
Like Nathan mentioned.
So Nathan, a change-up kind of question. So in all the years that you've been in business, what's been the biggest satisfaction or the greatest victory that you've had with a client that you've helped or turned around?
That's a good question. So I don't want to talk about it because it's actually not our current industry. So our business is predominantly 80% B2B, and we have a fun side, and we actually do restaurants.
Oh,
So
okay.
we do national franchise restaurants, and we do large scale campaigns, and I call it the fun side of my business. I don't like to talk about it because as everyone listening, it's all about focus. So if you imagine you come to Nathan's website and it's like, hey, we work with the largest B2B SaaS companies in Canada, such as Constellation Software, and then right beside you got like a ramen shop image, it's just confusing messaging.
Right.
But I have done a lot of ramen shop. We've done a lot of restaurants, and I would say that's actually one of our more fun big wins, where we have done campaigns where we have increased baseline revenue month over month by over 80% from a single marketing campaign.
Wow.
And what are you
It's
doing
massive.
for restaurants to increase it like that?
So I have a thing. So I've always had a theory where the number one way to market a restaurant is to give champions a reason to annoy their friends to go back to the restaurant. So you all have that friend. You're like, oh my God, we need to go to KFC. It's like, man, we're not having KFC. We've had KFC enough. And it's like,
Right.
no, but you don't know. There's this new sauce, and it's like, it's crazy. It's amazing. And then you sucker your friends going back into KFC. So my whole thing is about creating something that is big enough, interesting enough to generate conversation. And if you can't do it, don't do the campaign.
Yep.
So every marketing campaign we do for every restaurant follows that same premise. If it is not big enough, if it is not cool enough, it doesn't have enough virality behind it and some operational sense, meaning like it has to be good food. You can't just put ice cream on chicken and call it viral. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
But if it fits all those things, generally speaking, if you put money behind it and you actually execute it well, it will bring net new people into store because the champions will drag them in, and there will be some people that will essentially just drag themselves in because it's interesting. And my whole thing is that the basis of a successful restaurant is building your book of business. So the more
Right.
people that comes into the store, the more likely you have retention. The more retention you have, the more base you have of sales and revenue that you can consistently rely on every single month. So that's like one of our fun ones. I'll give a B2B SaaS one, and the only reason I don't find it so exciting is because it's like SaaS, and it's like, okay, so we've done a 4-month project, we've tripled, keywords, and they've got more traffic, and they're getting a lot more impressions, and it was a simple campaign, and that's an arousing success for a company, but like not nearly as fun as restaurants.
Right. It does. There's no sizzle to that steak, right?
There's no
It's like,
sizzle. It's like, oh
Yeah.
wow. It's like, wow, 500% increase in keywords, high fives. It's like, yeah, but it's
yeah.
like,
But with the restaurant, let me sprinkle my little salt and like, oh, that's sexy. I like that. So
it is sexy. But then the same premise is for that. So the B2B SaaS, we've increased MQLs. We've increased MQLs by 30%. We've generated. We've completely blown through our SQLs for this year for SEO. So sexy, but just not as fun. It's just not as visual.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up the question because everyone's talking about it. What's your thoughts on AI and ChatGPT and things like that for writing content for websites?
It's incredibly scary for a lot of people. And the other thing is also when a ChatGPT actually first came out, I actually had one of my team members literally just focus on it to focus on your business. So in my opinion, AI is fundamentally going to change how all businesses operate. And if you're not using AI inside of operations right now, I can guarantee you are going to be a laggard in terms of operational KPIs, which means you're going to be making less money and producing less product than everyone else. I will say that I was naive to think that after my 6 months of deep diving into ChatGPT that I was like, okay, we're good. And I literally said that. I was like, yeah, we're good. We're good, guys. We've got new policies, new processes. We're going to use it. And I stopped. That was a terrible idea. The amount of growth that is happening in AI in the last 6 months from the time it started till now is more. I thought it hit the peak. I was wrong. I was very, very, very wrong. And so I think AI is going to impact everything. And the fact that it does research so well, it really helps educate people on industries. It's a great learning tool. It's a great tool to build content. It's a great tool to brainstorm with. Like, there's nothing that it can't do that, like, I can't imagine. Even accounting, data and analysis, building a website, debugging something. Like, there's so many use cases. If you're not being fluent in the tools, like you are so behind.
What's your favorite AI tool?
Oh, different AIs for different reasons. Perplexity for factual research. ChatGPT for general.
Yeah.
Claude for creative writing. And I will be honest, I have not had the chance to really play with Gemini yet, which is Bard, which is Google. But I am understanding from my research that Bard has been really good at coding. I have not tested that yet. So I think in general, just like every market, AI will find its own specialties. So I think they're all finding their level, and I would say ChatGPT is just a general winner. It's not the best in class for everything, but it generally does everything pretty well. So it's like it's hitting 8 out of 10s on everything. But if you want like facts and great research, like Perplexity's a 10 out of 10. If you want like really good creative writing, Claude's like, I wouldn't say a 10 out of 10, but certainly a 9 out of 10 versus ChatGPT.
Okay. I'm going to give a plug for Opus.pro. So that's a good one for video creation. So let's say like this podcast, I upload my YouTube link into it, and then it splices it into shorts for me. Adds your what's it called? The captions and emojis and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, auto generates it.
Yep.
So, well, thank you so much, Nathan. A lot of insight in a short amount of time. So on behalf of our sponsors, A Advanced Services and Fuse Networks, my name's Galen.
I'm Joe.
Coming at you from the Creative Block Studios in Seattle, Washington. Nathan from Canada, thank you for joining us. A lot of good stuff. Maybe sometime in the future we could have you on again, but really appreciate you joining us. So thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of the Ask Valor Masterminds podcast. Thanks everyone.